The people who hate your boundaries usually benefited from your lack of them. That truth explains more than most apologies ever will. Some pressure does not arrive as anger. It arrives as guilt with good lighting. It sounds caring while it quietly reaches for control. You have felt this before. Something in you tightened, even when their words sounded harmless. That was not you being difficult. That was your mind catching a mismatch. Today we are naming that mismatch. We are talking about the boundaries manipulators keep testing because soft resistance still leaves a door open. And by the end, you will know how to close that door without becoming cold, cruel, or afraid. Start with this. If you have to explain your no 10 different ways, the conversation is no longer about understanding. It is about wearing you down until your answer changes. Watch for that early, because the most revealing move usually comes after your first calm refusal. A manipulator does not always attack the boundary itself. They often attack your right to have one. That is why the pressure feels so personal. They are not just asking for access. They are asking you to doubt your own limits. Here's what's really happening. When your boundary is clear, they lose a shortcut. They lose convenience, control, attention, emotional supply, or easy influence. So they test whether your limit is real or just a sentence. That test can look polite. It can sound wounded. It can even arrive wrapped in compliments. But the goal is simple. Can they move you away from your truth and back into compliance? Your job is not to win a debate. Your job is to make your boundary expensive to cross. Not through chaos, through consistency. That is the first shift. Strong boundaries are not dramatic speeches. They are repeated patterns that teach people what happens when they ignore your words. If your rule changes every time the pressure changes, manipulation stays hopeful. If your rule stays steady, manipulation starts looking for another target. So let's build the kind of boundary pressure cannot charm, guilt, or exhaust. The first boundary manipulators struggle with is access, not emotional access, simple access. Your time, your phone, your attention, your availability. Many people try to protect themselves by explaining why they are busy. That feels reasonable, but it gives a manipulator material to negotiate. They can argue with your schedule. They cannot argue with your standard. Notice the difference between "I can't tonight" and "I don't take calls after 9." One sounds temporary, the other reveals a rule. Rules are harder to pry open than moods. That is why your boundary gets stronger when it stops sounding like a one-time exception. A quick everyday example makes this obvious. At work, someone messages late, marks it urgent, and expects instant access because they know you hate disappointing people. The old pattern says, respond now, resent it later, and call yourself professional. The aware pattern says I answer these in the morning unless there is a true emergency. Same situation, different standard. One trains intrusion, the other trains respect. Watch for people who act confused when your availability becomes structured. Confusion is not always confusion. Sometimes it is protest in softer clothing. So here's how you take your power back. State access boundaries as policies, not apologies. Short sentence, neutral tone, no courtroom defense. I don't discuss serious issues over text. I need notice before plans. I leave when shouting starts. Clean lines like that are hard to twist without exposing the twisting. The second place manipulators push is emotional labor. They want you managing their feelings while abandoning your own. This often hides behind phrases that make you feel responsible for keeping the peace. If you cared, you would. Why are you making this such a big deal? I guess I just matter less now. Those lines are useful to study because they all do the same thing. They shift the focus from behavior to your supposed failure as a person. That shift matters. The moment the conversation becomes a trial about your character, your boundary is already being dragged off the table. A strong defense is to keep returning to behavior, not their pain story, not your guilt story. The behavior. I hear you're upset and my answer is still no. That sentence does two powerful things. It recognizes emotion without surrendering decision-making. Manipulators hate that combination because it closes the door they usually walk through. There is one tell that gives this away fast. When your empathy increases, do they calm down and work with you? Or do they escalate and ask for more? Healthy people use empathy to reconnect. Manipulative people often use empathy as proof that the pressure is working. That is why compassion without limits becomes an invitation. And this is where many kind people get trapped. They think firmness cancels kindness. It does not. Kindness is how you speak. Boundaries are what you protect. You can be warm and still be immovable. In fact, that combination is one of the hardest for manipulators to defeat. It gives them no cruelty to point at. It gives them no chaos to exploit. Just a calm wall they cannot turn into a fight. Midway through this, check your own pattern honestly. If you've caught yourself breaking your limit just to stop the tension, you're not alone. Tell me below. The third line manipulators test is privacy. They want details they have not earned. This is where many people over-explain, overshare, and then wonder why their words get used against them later. Information is not always intimacy. Sometimes it is ammunition collected politely. If someone punishes your honesty, your next act of self-respect is selective access. You do not owe full transparency to someone who has shown you selective care. That can sound like this. I am not getting into that. I am keeping that private. I've already answered that. Notice how none of those lines contain guilt. They do not beg permission to be a person. They simply define the edge. Watch for this next move. When direct pressure fails, many manipulators switch to emotional fog. They joke after crossing a line. They minimize after disrespect. They accuse you of overreacting when you react accurately. This is not always full gaslighting. Sometimes it is smaller and more common. A steady campaign to make your instincts feel inconvenient. Here's the defense. Trust repeated patterns over polished explanations. If the same violation keeps appearing under new wording, believe the pattern, not the performance. That principle changes everything, because manipulation often survives by living one incident at a time. It wants every problem treated like a misunderstanding. Boundaries get stronger when you zoom out. Not, was this comment rude? But, what pattern does this comment belong to? At home, this shows up in simple ways. You say you need quiet after work, and suddenly they pick that exact window to unload drama or demand decisions. Then, when you respond with strain, they focus on your tone. Now the issue is no longer the intrusion. It is your reaction to the intrusion. That reversal is a classic pressure move. Do not chase it. Return to the original line. This is not a good time for this conversation. Then act accordingly. Leave the room. End the call. Stop replying. A boundary without action is just hope dressed as language. That may sound sharp, but it is freeing, because once you accept it, you stop searching for the perfect sentence. You start building the right consequence, and consequences do not need to be loud. They just need to be real. Less access, longer response times, fewer personal details, shorter visits, no private meetings, no last-minute rescues, no debates after the answer is given. This is where awareness becomes architecture. You are not merely resisting a moment. You are redesigning the path people use to reach you. A manipulator can work with loopholes. They struggle with structure. So make your structure visible to yourself first. What gets an immediate no? What gets delayed? What gets one warning? What gets distance? When your mind has already decided the response, your body stops panicking in the moment. That matters more than people think. Manipulators often win in speed. They catch you off guard. They create urgency. They fill silence with pressure so you answer before you can feel yourself. A powerful defense is the pause, not a dramatic pause, a practical one. Let me think about that. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I am not deciding under pressure. Those lines protect your nervous system from borrowed urgency. And borrowed urgency is one of the oldest tricks in the room. If they need your answer right now, ask yourself who the rush serves. Usually, it is not you. Here's a sharper reframe. Boundaries do not fail because they are too harsh. They usually fail because they are too negotiable to people who see negotiation as an opening, not a conversation. That is why tone matters less than repetition. You do not need a perfect voice. You need a reliable pattern. Say less. Repeat more. Exit sooner. These are quiet skills, but they change your entire social landscape. Another everyday example proves this fast. Someone keeps asking for favors they never return. Every request arrives with flattery, pressure, or a tiny crisis. When you finally hesitate, they act shocked, as if your role was always to be available. This is not a friendship problem alone. It is a boundary data point. The question is not whether they are offended. The question is whether your life keeps shrinking to keep them comfortable. If it does, the line is already overdue. So here's how you shut that cycle down. Use the broken record method. One sentence, same sentence. No fresh justifications. I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. The repetition is the message. It tells the other person there is no hidden doorway behind your politeness. And if they keep pushing, the next move is not a better explanation. It is less access to you. People who respect you adjust. People who need control protest. That difference is painful but useful, because boundaries do not just protect your peace. They reveal character. They show you who can hear no without trying to punish you for saying it. And that revelation is one of the greatest gifts a boundary gives. Now let's talk about the boundary most people miss. The boundary around self-definition. Manipulators often speak as if they know your motives better than you do. They tell you what you meant. They rename your limits as selfishness, cruelty, paranoia, weakness, or ego. This is powerful because identity language goes deeper than a simple disagreement. It pushes you to defend who you are instead of protecting what you know. Do not accept that trade. If someone keeps defining you to control you, answer the behavior, not the label. I know my intention. That label does not change my decision. We are talking about the request, not my character. Those lines pull the conversation out of the fog. They also expose a hidden rule many manipulators depend on. If they can make you explain yourself long enough, you may eventually abandon yourself just to be understood. Watch for this. The need to be understood is where many strong people become unusually vulnerable. Because you are not weak, you are conscientious. You want fairness. You want mutual clarity. But with a manipulative person, clarity is often not the goal. Control is. Once you see that, you stop feeding the wrong machine. You stop offering deeper sincerity to someone using strategy against sincerity. And that is not bitterness, it is discernment. Real boundaries are built from discernment, not anger. Anger may wake you up. Discernment keeps you safe. So here is the final standard. A boundary manipulators cannot cross is one tied to action, not mood, and rooted in self-trust, not approval. It sounds simple because it is simple. Simple does not mean easy. It means clear enough to practice. Say what is true. Say it briefly. Do not defend it into weakness. And when the line is crossed, respond in a way your future self will recognize as self-respect. Not perfect, consistent. That consistency is how you become harder to confuse, harder to rush, harder to guilt, harder to train against yourself. Soon, you will notice something strange. The people who once kept testing you either adjust or drift. That is not failure, that is information. Not everyone who leaves your old access deserved your new standards. And not every uncomfortable reaction means you made the wrong call. Sometimes discomfort is just the sound of a pattern breaking. If this helped you see the pressure more clearly, subscribe and stay close. There's another move manipulators rely on after a boundary lands, and most people mistake it for remorse. We are breaking that pattern next. Until then, protect your attention, protect your energy, and remember this. The right people may not love every limit you set, but they will not need to crush it to stay in your life. That is how respect sounds when control is not in the room.